How is it that we can't talk to each other about important issues without having to come on at different times? And I think that kind of exemplifies what it is that I want to fix, and that I think all of us in the room want to fix, because we're frustrated by this problem. So what I really want to start out talking about is why the scope of this problem as it relates to elections specifically. So I'm going to talk a lot about stuff that don't have to do with your classrooms at first. First 20 minutes or so, you don't even need to take a note. Next 20 minutes after that, you probably want to take a few notes just for some specific resources that I'll mention. First part is just absorbing and just listen and learn, because you will relate to this. In this quote, let's figure out who said this. Low information voters can be doctors. Low information voters can be scientists. It has nothing to do with IQ. It has to do with what they don't know because of their media sources. Low information voters are clearly people that don't have all the information to make a voting choice. Sounds pretty smart. Who said it? Smart guy. This guy, Rush Limbaugh. I present that because a lot of people think Rush Limbaugh is a big fat idiot, but he said something that was pretty intelligent. Low information voters can be doctors and scientists too. Who voted in the last election? There was 235 million eligible voters, 130 million people voted. That's 54% of the eligible voting population, 54%. The likelihood of a person voting is directly related to their age. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. Your income, the richer you are, the more likely you are to vote. Your educational attainment, the more degrees you got, the more likely you are to vote. So what does that mean? That older, wealthy, well-educated people are the ones who are primarily that 54.7%. They're the ones that are making decisions for the rest of us. So what about the people who didn't vote? Why didn't they vote? Teachers, you're going to like this. You've heard all kind of excuses in your classroom. Are these good ones? Number one reason, I was too busy. Schedule conflicts. All right. I was sick. I have a disability. Couldn't make it to vote. Okay. Wasn't interested. All right. A lot of people aren't interested in the election. I didn't like the candidates or the campaign issue. Boy, is that relevant this time around. A lot of people don't like the candidates. What about I was out of town, I didn't know, I had problems, the polling place was inconvenient, the dog ate my homework, you get it. These sound like excuses, right? So that's why people don't vote. So we got to ask ourselves, well, does it matter if they don't vote? So what? We all think we should, but should we? Who cares, right? Let's ask this guy. This guy, smart guy, Ilyas Somin, he's a Georgetown law professor. He says, political ignorance is actually rational for most of the public, including smart people. That's because there is very little chance that your vote will actually make a difference to the outcome of an election. About 1 in a 60 million chance. You got a 1 in 60 million chance. Boy, why should I bother, you know? Why do I need to learn all these issues just so I have a 1 in 60 million chance? That's worse odds than the lottery. Well, what about the flip side? Who thinks we should do it? Who thinks we should vote? Founding fathers certainly did. James Madison wrote, "A popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is a prologue to farce or tragedy, or perhaps both. A people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives." Every founding father has a statement kind of close to this, right? We've read them all in our classrooms. Ben Franklin said, "You've got a republic, now just don't mess it up," right? And for a lot of us, we feel like our republic is getting a little dangerously close to the edge. We don't like the direction it's going. It feels like the next generation of folks just aren't armed with the information we want them to have to make smart decisions. And that's not a good feeling. But let's think about why voting might matter.
It's not even a democracy.
Oh my God, yes, it is.
You know how many democracies there were in the world in 1900? 0. There was no universal suffrage in the entire world. We could do better in America. It could be more representative. In fact, there are ballot measures in lots of states designed to make it less representative. The only way to make it more representative is to vote. And finally, the one that bugs me the most. You know my vote's not gonna matter. The notion that your vote won't matter because it probably won't be the individual deciding vote in a particular election is a magnificent failure of imagination. If every young person who used this excuse got off their butt and voted one Tuesday every 2 years, they would literally be the deciding voice in thousands of elections. So maybe it's time to do that, to recognize that the power lies with us. That's what democracies are. Make this...
Okay, you get it. You get it. So this guy obviously thinks your vote matters a lot. So whether it does matter or not matter, I think all of us in the room probably think it does matter, and that's why we're here and find this so very valuable. But I just want to illustrate why people think it's not valuable, because they feel like it's my 1 in 60 million shot, or that all these various other excuses are keeping me from it, or what a lot of us feel like I feel when it's on a ballot measure about which judge to vote for. I have no idea. I don't know who these people are. How am I possibly going to make an informed decision about these judges? So a lot of people feel that way about judges, ballot measures, Senate candidates, congressional candidates, and the presidential candidates. And we don't want to feel that way. We want to feel confident in our knowledge that we're making good decisions. So where are people getting the information? Where are people getting information to make their voting decisions? Traditionally, it's been television. You know this. People watch television debates. They watch political advertising, and that's still the #1 source of news. Look, over time, television has dominated, but the dominance is going down a little bit. In 1992, 78% of Americans said television was their #1 media for getting voter information. Down in 2012, 10 years later, it's down to about 69%, and that number continues to decline. Meanwhile, you see internet starting to increase. It went from 0% in 1992 to currently about 34%. This is across all age groups. So it's up and coming as the source. Newspapers, you can see they are on the decline from 47% in 1992 down to 22% in 2012. So newspapers are on decline, internet's up, television still dominates. Now, factor that with this bit of information. 61% of voters, they don't trust the news they're getting. So whether they're watching TV, they're reading the internet, they're reading the newspapers, most people aren't buying it anyways. We have that kind of healthy skepticism built into our media. Now, what is the best media to get voter information? This Stanford professor, Stephen Chafee, thinks that television is still the best way. And he talks about how it's a way to observe candidates' personal qualities, their intelligence, their speaking ability. It lets you judge for yourself. I don't know. Maybe it does. I'll let you be the judge of that. I tell you, another point of view is depends where you live. So for voters who lived in cities like ours, Los Angeles, where there's not just one source of local news, there's Channel 9 and 7 and 2 and 5, and all of them have all their perspectives. And so because we have so many choices on our media, we're getting lots of different perspectives on the news. And what happens in large cities is voters tend to vote centrist because they see all these different perspectives and end up somewhere in the middle. In rural districts where there's maybe 1 or 2 local television news stations, they tend to vote more polarized. They tend to reflect more of the point of view of the news stations in their areas. What I want to talk about next is really a horrible problem, I think. The problem is this. We have 435 congressional districts in our country. And of these districts, out of 435%, and you can see the number, otherwise I'd ask, what's your guess? How many of them are considered competitive, where you don't know who the winner is going to be? It's 26 out of 435. It's about 5% of the districts are considered competitive. So we're doing all this voting so we can make a difference in 5% of congressional races. That doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like our vote is really making that much of a difference. But why is that happening? And I want to talk about that. Why are these races so uncompetitive? Why are the results so predictable? All right, let's talk about this. Now, when evaluating candidates, their physical attributes had a substantial influence on their public perception of them. This sounds kind of obvious, maybe. You'd think, this person looks funny, I don't quite trust them, look at their mean-looking face, I don't know about this person. You know who used that strategy really effectively? Remember when Donald Trump was talking about Carly Fiorina's face and Rand Paul's hair? He might have been doing it because he was mean, but he was also doing it because he's probably aware of that strategy. If you don't know these candidates, you're likely to use their physical appearance as their judgment. The good news is that the more information you have, such as what party they're with, what are their stand on specific issues, their attractiveness had almost nothing to do with it. And over time, we've seen some rather unattractive but very effective politicians, and that's a good thing. For your students, for young people, the number one source of news is also television. What you're looking at now is a breakdown by age. Look at internet. It's at 54% compared to the general public, which was at 34%. Internet is rising, particularly for young voters. They are turning more online. At my own website, procon.org, we serve 25 million people. Of those 25 million people, over half are coming from their mobile devices. That is the trend. So they're getting their news from internet, primarily from their phones. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the news sources. And I'm going to skip this slide and go to this one about facts. There is a famous social scientist named Brendan Nyhan. He was at University of Michigan. What he found out is that when misinformed people, particularly political partisans, were exposed to corrected facts in news stories, they rarely changed their minds. And you might have your students as examples. Whenever you tell them, "No, student, you're just straight wrong about that fact." Do they say, "Oh, you're right, teacher, I'm totally wrong, my bad"? Or do they say, I'm right. I'm sure I'm right. And they double down and they become more strongly set in their beliefs. They call it a backfire effect, or they call it this problem that facts, and it seems strange to say it, but facts could make the misinformation stronger. That sounds bad, right? It's worse than you think. In Iowa was right first in the nation for the primary voting. A lot of the political candidates want to do a good job in Iowa. Iowans have a very close connection to their political candidates. They see a lot of them. In Iowa, 1,000 Iowans were given a quiz about the issue of welfare. Of the people who took that quiz, 50% of them, half of them, were confident that all their answers were right. Okay, half thought all their answers were right. However, 3% got more than half right. Wow. How do you explain the gap between half thinking they were all right and actually 3% getting more than half of them correct? The ones who were the most confident they were right were the ones who knew the least about welfare. Brendan Nyhan wrote that it's hard to be optimistic about the effectiveness of fact-checking. And the reason this happens is because people tend to interpret information, and you know this, with an eye towards reinforcing their pre-existing views. They call it motivated reasoning, call it confirmation bias. We call it very hard to get people to change their minds. What about smart folks? You guys all most likely have bachelor's degrees. Some of you probably have master's degrees. Some of you probably have PhDs or JDs or MBAs. You probably got a teaching credential. You're smart folks. Same for me. Graduate school, UCLA, the whole bit. You know who's the worst? We are. We're the worst. You know why? Politically sophisticated thinkers were less open to new information. We may be right about 90% of the things, but on that 10%, it's almost impossible to change our minds. And the reason why is because we are phenomenally good at rationalizing. We are smart enough to think we must be right because the person who told me that, they've got to be wrong. They must have their source wrong. That can't possibly be true. We have all these methods of justifying our own wrong beliefs. So how are we going to fix this problem, folks? It's a big problem because we see that our kids are going to the internet, they're reinforcing their own ideologies, not just because they want to, but because Google's algorithms are changing what they see. Their Facebook pages, if they like a Trump statement or they like a Hillary statement, guess what they're going to see more of? More of what they liked. It's a self-fulfilling auto-feedback mechanism that's built into our technologies. And it's worse than that. when there's a great book called The Big Sort by Bill Bishop. He talks about, how many of you have been to Austin, Texas? If you've been to Austin, so Austin is it's a diverse city. Parts of Austin don't look at all like other parts of Austin. Same in our city of Los Angeles. Somebody's driving around Austin deciding where they want to move to the neighborhood. They go into one neighborhood and see trucks with gun racks on them. They think, no, this is not my kind of neighborhood. They go to another neighborhood, they see Priuses in the driveway. They think, oh yeah, that's my neighborhood right there. So what do? They self-selected where they ended up moving. That means their neighbors are more likely to reflect their ideology, that the structures in their community are more likely to reflect their ideology. It means that their technology, we already talked about, is reinforcing their ideology, and they themselves are reinforcing their own ideology based on which news channels they watch or what kind of information they choose to believe or not believe. So what's happening is we're basically, whatever we think, we just keep thinking that, and it's hard to undo that. What's the consequence of that? Well, we know the consequence of that. It's called dysfunctional Thanksgiving dinner. How do we get past that? How many times have we had a Thanksgiving dinner where one family member, you're like, oh gosh, he just brought up politics. Now, he brought up politics. Now this person's going to get upset. Now this one says I can't eat the turkey. And this one thinks they're a fascist for eating the turkey. And this one, and it just becomes a big mess. Why is it that we can't have productive conversations about important issues at our Thanksgiving tables, but sometimes we can? And sometimes when we can't, it feels good. It feels good when we make connections with people of opposing views. But it's hard to do, and we are trained in our technology and our media, and everything on our political landscape is reinforcing that we don't. So our kids end up being a reflection of that. Our governments end up being a reflection of that. And what is the result of that? Dysfunctional government, right? Congress members used to interact with one another. They used to go to the softball games together and barbecues together. Now they don't do that. They just go home back to their district. They spend their time fundraising. They don't interact and talk to one another. We don't either. We don't in our families. How many of you have unfriended somebody on social media because you thought they were just a fool and they were saying crazy stuff about politics and you did not want to hear it anymore? Probably many of you. I sure have. And it's hard not to want to do that because when someone starts saying things we really disagree with or find offensive, we just don't want to hear it. It's happening in our universities. Students now want to have safe zones and places where they're not allowed to talk about certain issues. Don't bring it up because I don't want to hear another point of view. And what ends up happening is we're just reinforcing our own ideologies and are never exposed to people with different ideologies. And that is a big problem because it's going to lead to an extension of what we already feel in our daily lives, which is, hey, can't we just talk to one another like people and relate to one another like people? So how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that with the election? How are we going to do that in general? It's a tough question. We got 20 minutes to figure this out. So we got to get to work. You're right. So one of the ways you do this in your classrooms, we talk about critical thinking. So critical thinking to the rescue. Well, here's the one strategy. Group 1 was asked, what percentage of the federal budget is and should be spent on welfare? When that group 1 was asked that, they gave an is number and should be number with a gap of about 20%. All right? So they had no idea what the number is that's spent on welfare. They just guessed what it is and what it should be, a gap of 20%. Now, group 2 was told that 1% of the budget is spent on welfare, and then they were asked, what percentage of the federal budget should be spent on welfare? The difference between is and should was a much smaller gap. It was 7% versus 20%. One strategy could be presenting a fact as a grounding fact rather than ask this open-ended question so that you get this very disparate gap. Another way, respectful learning and discussion spaces. Respectful, right? And so what that means is if somebody has a contrary point of view, they don't get laughed at or mocked. I'm sure they don't in your classrooms, but we know that is not a good thing to do. So we don't do it in the classrooms. We make it comfortable, make it okay for people to disagree, even if they have a minority point of view. So what? What do you have to say? Why? Self-esteem is a factor. If a person feels good about themselves, they'll consider contrary perspective. If we feel attacked, we will not consider contrary perspectives, right? Somebody says, I don't like you. You say, you know what? I don't like you. I don't like what you have to say, and I don't care what it is. I won't like it. That's no good. We want to be able to say, I like you, I just don't like what you think about this issue. Oh yeah, why not? Let's get into it. And the difference, and this is really the basic of it, is you know how sometimes you meet your friend at Starbucks and you'll have a conversation and you feel like, boy, we are really connecting. I am really listening to you. You are really listening to me. We are hearing each other. Thanksgiving dinner doesn't feel like that kind of coffee talk. And basically, to use this analogy, the classroom discussions need to feel more like coffee talks and less like Thanksgiving discussions. So what works best? If the students are going online to get voting information, then I'm going to talk about online. I think they're going there anyways. We got to make sure they're using these resources in the right ways and using the right ones. So online, they're going to see the sources. They're going to know where this information came from. They're going to see contextual facts that they might not get from having random discussions. A lot of these online resources are geared to stimulate their critical thinking. A lot of these online websites are explicitly nonpartisan and non-threatening. They feel, like I said, like an earnest coffee talk, not like a Thanksgiving conversation. A lot of these websites will aggregate data in a way that is almost impossible for us to do as people. These resources do it for us. And they offer this comprehensive information a lot of times in very cool, interactive, simple formats. All right, so what are some of those? I'll talk about some of those. I Side With. This is an election resource, and if you want to take notes, this is the only time you might want to do it. I Side With offers a quiz about the political candidates and where they stand on the issues. The good thing about I Side With is it's cool looking. So for students, they'll just go and answer a series of questions, and they can answer as few as 10 or as many as 100. And then they click Submit, and it calculates and says, you match 87% with Hillary Clinton, or you match 42% with Donald Trump, or whoever your top candidate is, it shows you. So for students who you don't want to bias them one way or the other, you don't want to tell them, well, Donald Trump thinks this and Hillary Clinton thinks this. You just want them to answer what do they think about these issues. Boom, this is a pretty cool resource. My problem with the resource is that the sourcing on it is not transparent, and so it's really hard to figure out how they matched you. I have a little bit of a problem with that, but I think I would give these guys like a B+, A-, because the resource is just very easy to use, and it's most likely going to match the student with the candidate that they should have matched with anyways. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, VoteSmart is a pretty cool resource. What this one does is it lets you look up the legislation that a person has voted for and against. It lets you find out all kind of biographical information about that person. This is really useful if the candidate has a legislative background. If they don't, it's not as useful. It can be rather overwhelming because if they do have a legislative background, you're going to see they voted this way on AB 17, this way on AB 12, and you don't know what these things are. So it's really comprehensive, perhaps too much so, but everything is there. I like using mainstream media. I'm just using New York Times as an example. It could be Fox News. It could be MSNBC. It could be the bigs. And the reason why I say that is because they are very good at data visualization. I think in particular the New York Times, they are able to produce these cool looking maps, color-coded charts, things that will take this dense amount of information and put it into these really cool graphics. Good on them for doing it because this stuff can be very complicated. And so mainstream media, I think a lot of their websites are very good. And New York Times in particular has a teacher component on it, and they have all kind of resources designed just for educators. It's on their thing called the Learning Blog. Living Room Candidate. If you don't know this one, folks, it's a fun one, not just for your classrooms, but for yourselves. A lot of us have lived through many different presidential elections, and you might remember some of the political advertising you've seen. Some of the political ads are ones that are highlighted in the Reagan Library's excellent curricula. They've picked some of the best. If you want to see all the rest, you go to Living Room Candidate. So I'll just play one of them that was a really popular one, famous one, and you probably know it, but I'll show you because it's fun.
Six, eight, nine, must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
All right. How many of you have seen that one before, the Daisy ad? All right. That's a fun one. Obviously very dramatic. Now, living room candidate has got a lot of those really dramatic videos. They're really fun and often engaging in the classroom. I want to mention this, Procon.org. So this is our resource. I didn't want my talk to be a commercial for Procon, but this part is a commercial for Procon. So what we have looked at is the presidential candidates and their views on the political issues. We've done this in 2008, 12, and now again in 2016. What I'm showing you right now is an image from the 1968 Democratic and Republican National Conventions. It was when ABC was at the bottom of the ratings, and they used to do traditional convention coverage. Some of you may remember it was following the candidates around in the convention and talking to people at the conventions, and it was rather dull but very predictable. So ABC, being third in the ratings, said, we want to be number one. What's it going to take? So they brought in William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal, two really smart people who had completely opposite views on politics, and they put them on stage and said, okay, we're going to have a pro and con view about the Democratic and Republican National Conventions. Problem was, these two people hated each other's guts so bad that it made for fascinating television. So these people, they went at each other on air, called each other all kind of names. It almost came to blows in some cases, really horrible insults, and it was great television. ABC went from third to first by far, and now we see that the legacy of that, it's called talking heads on television, right? We see that all the time now where these people are bashing each other for political blood sport. It all started really, that was ground zero. That's where it began, 1968. And I had brought copies of the film and I left them on the table, but they're gone now. But if you want, write to me and I'm happy to send you a free copy of it. We also have a discussion guide related to the film. It's a wonderful documentary if you don't get a chance to see it. So what is it that we have done at Procon? We've chased after these candidates and got their views on currently 71 different issues. Now, we all know politicians often don't like to say what they think about an issue, so they mumble or they zip their lips. Or maybe they said something in the past that they just don't want anybody to find out. So we ask these candidates, what's your view on X? And we don't just say, what's your view on abortion? We ask them, should abortion be legal? We ask a specific question. They'll either answer the question for us, in which case we post it on the site. If they don't answer the question, no problem. Guess what? We have a staff of researchers. These are people with PhD degrees, master's degrees, who worked for CNN, who've worked for different journalism enterprises, and they're very good at finding from the candidates' prior speeches, interviews, articles, voting records, etc., what they have done on and thought about an issue. If the candidate has changed their mind on an issue, no problem. We'll show what the old one was. We'll show what the new one was. We're not calling it a flip-flop. We're just saying it used to be X, now it's Y. And we present it all there. We also show the sources. So if you want to know what Donald Trump said about an issue, you can read the statement and you can see the source. And you can go back to the source and see for yourself. For me, the transparency was super important, and I just wanted that to help establish our credibility. So you can see all the different candidates that we looked at. Currently, we're down to 4. We are tracking Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Gary Johnson and Jill Stein of the Green Party. And some of them are eager to work with us. Some of them is a little bit of arm twisting, and some of them don't say anything at all. And our research staff, no problem. They're going to find it. What we do is aggregate and sort. So here's an example. Should the United States maintain its embargo against Cuba? And in response to that question, you just see at a glance who's in the pro column, who's in the con column, who's in the not clear column. You can click one of their heads or just troll down the page and you can read their statement and read their position. That's kind of a handy way, because it will take our researchers maybe a week to put this stuff together, to find out all their positions. I don't have a week to find out their positions. I just want to know what it is. And so for me, it's a very handy way to find out their views on issues. So we then take all those position statements and present them side by side in one little chart. So you can have one chart with all our questions and see across who's pro, who's con on which particular issues. For us, this is really popular with particularly with elderly folks, and in communities where they don't have good internet access, they'll print this page and distribute it to their community so they can see on this page where the candidates stand on issues. Fun part is all the same questions we ask the candidates, have a go at it. Answer them yourself. You can answer these same exact questions. And what's cool is as you're taking the quiz, it's showing you how you matched with the other candidates in real time. So it'll show you matched 2 of 2 with Trump. Like, oh, really? Or 5 of 5 with Clinton, or 5 of 10 with Jill Stein. And this really happened. We've had members of the presidential campaigns come into our office, take this quiz, we hid the results, and at the end of them taking the quiz, they ended up matching with the candidate who wasn't theirs. I thought, yes, this is working. This is a blind quiz. Now, for a lot of these issues, we're asking students, what do you think about it? They don't know. They don't even know what it is. So what do you think about, should the Glass-Steagall be reinstated? What's Glass-Steagall? Should the U.S. maintain its embargo against Cuba? What? Where's Cuba? We have an embargo against them? So a lot of these issues, we need some background information. So what we do at ProCon is provide background information. Here's pro and con arguments. Here's all of the reasons for and against U.S. drone strikes overseas. And all of the support is sourced, and you can click and see where it all came from. So I think that's really going to help the students understand the issues. It's going to help us understand the issues as voters, and I think it's going to lead to more informed decisions. So we talked about critical thinking to the rescue here. Critical thinking, we keep hearing about it, but it's being cooked into more and more things. So we've seen it in the National Council for the Social Studies standards. I wrote 3C, I meant C3 standards. We've seen it cooked into the National Council for Teachers of English. We've seen it cooked into the Common Core. We've seen it cooked into a whole lot of things. Critical thinking, we do it in our daily lives. Should I buy this tomato? It's got some dimples on it. It looks kind of old. It's wrinkled. I don't want this tomato. See, how am I going to get to 3rd Street Promenade at 4 o'clock? Boy, I think I'm going to shoot up Bundy, and then I'm going to cut over on Washington, and I'm going to take this route, that route, and we figure it out. That's critical thinking. What about, do I support the death penalty or not? Damn it, I don't support the death penalty. I'm like, wow, what happened to critical thinking? What happened to this whole process? What happened to the pros and the cons and weighing all these factors? So we're innately capable of critical thinking, but we just don't apply it to the most important things. We do. I mean, our students, they don't. They don't apply it to things that really matter, and they can. And obviously, you know that. Now, from where I sit, because we serve this huge audience, like I said, 25 million people, I just wanted to show why critical thinking matters from what the studies say, because you're doing it in your classrooms. Now, this is just an example, but if you go to ProCon, you can see all of the reasons for it. What critical thinking does is it gives people what employers say is the #1 skill they want in their employees. They said critical thinking for them matters more than the person's undergraduate degree, their ability to think critically, because they'll be problem solvers and decision makers. When they asked 10,000 UCLA graduates, so there was a class of 1994 and earlier, in 2004 they asked them, what was the most important thing you learned in college? #1 was interpersonal skills. #2 was critical thinking skills. So we know employers like it. We know that graduates like it. We like it. We know that teachers like it. When the California Teachers Association did a survey of its membership and said, what's the most important learning outcome? Guess what? #1 was. It was critical thinking. So we all want it. So what's the benefit of it? Down this same page at ProCon, you'll see using controversial issue discussions in the classrooms to promote critical thinking has a few major benefits. #1, it teaches nonviolent strategies for dealing with conflict. Boy, how good of an outcome is that? It teaches self-esteem. Great. It teaches confidence. It makes a person more likely to vote. It makes a person more likely to participate in their community. It makes them more likely to raise funds for charity. It makes them more likely to do this host of things that we want them to do, and all by talking about issues in the classroom. Your students like to talk about issues. I tell you, of all the issues that we talk about at ProCon, #1 for us right now is the election. #2, do any of your students like to talk about marijuana? Well, it's our 2nd most popular topic. Any of your students like to talk about the death penalty? It's our 3rd most popular topic. They like to talk about immigration? That's our 4th. School uniforms, maybe there's elementary or middle school teachers, that's our 5th most popular. Go on and down the list. What's really popular with high school students in particular? Should we lower the drinking age from 21 to a lower age? They love that. So they want to talk about these issues, and we want them to. And the reason why is because I think politics should not be taboo. A lot of times we don't want to hear it from admin. We don't want to hear it from parents. We just are like, nope, not going to talk about that stuff, folks. Well, there's a consequence to that. The consequence is this self-isolating behavior where we end up not being able to understand other people's points of view. It's not only a good idea to do it. It is imperative for us to talk about these issues in the classroom because that's what the Founding Fathers designed this whole experiment in democracy to thrive on, is the fact that we're weighing and considering some really hard stuff. So I'm not intending to preach to you, because you could preach the same thing to me. We all know that that's how this thing works. But we know politics should not be taboo. People shouldn't be afraid to talk about it. We'll doom ourselves to gridlock, political gridlock, more of what we're seeing unless we start to do this. And by doing it, we're going to encourage this greater civic participation. So with that, that's really the nut of what I wanted to talk about. You've got some election resources. I'll mention, the book, The Big Sort by Bill Bishop, and this other great book called The Righteous Mind by a social psychologist by the name of Jonathan Haidt. If you don't have time to watch or read his book, watch his TED Talk. It's about 10 or 15 minutes. It's got about 4 million views. And he talks about the importance of being able to understand other points of view and what's so critical about that. And then, of course, the election resources. I'll mention ProCon, by the way, is free, so that you don't have to ask your librarian to get it. You just go to the website and use it. There's no registration requirements. There's no advertising. It's all just free. We're a 501c3 nonprofit public charity, and that is our service to the world. We are used in over 8,000 schools currently, and that's in all 50 states and in 87 countries. The last 2 were Tunisia and Ivory Coast. I was very happy about that. So I think we really are making a difference in the world, and I hope that you just come and use our sites. If you don't use the site and you want someone to come to your classroom and talk about ProCon, we also do in-school presentations. We'll conduct critical thinking seminars. If you don't want us to do it, you want to do it yourself, fine. Watch a video on our site. It's about 5 minutes long, and you'll kind of see what we do. We have a teacher's corner on our site that gives lesson plan ideas, not lesson plans, but lesson plan ideas. The reason I make the distinction is because my wife is a high school English teacher at Redondo Union High School. And I said, hey, Kim, look, we made these lesson plans. It's 7 pages long. It's all the stuff that you want to be doing in your classroom. She just threw it. She said, you know what? I don't need 7 pages. I just need a paragraph. Just tell me what's the idea. I'll figure it out. And I thought, you know what? That's right. We asked other teachers. I asked 10 other teachers. None of them wanted a full lesson plan. They just wanted the lesson plan idea. Okay, teachers, I heard you loud and clear. We got lesson plan ideas at ProCon, bunch of them, so you can see if you want to teach fact versus fiction, if you want to teach counter-argument, if you want to teach how to write to your elected representatives, all these different kinds of things. We have some specific strategies for how to do that, that we have developed in conjunction with the National Association of Media Literacy Educators. The last resource that I did not include in the slide, I'll just mention now, is it's called the Teaching for Democracy Alliance. A lot of nonprofits, they don't work well together. This is an exception. ProCon is working with the Reagan Library. We're working with iCivics. We're working with the National Council for the Social Studies and a variety of other civics groups, and are putting together some of what we think are the best resources for teaching the election, all on this page. Again, the page is free. There's no advertising. It's just highly curated stuff. So I don't mean to resource dump on you, but I have. So there you go. There's all these resources available to you, and I hope you use them. So I think I'm supposed to end at 2:30, which gives me a minute for questions. And if you have questions, I'm happy to hear them. Yes, please.
I'm sorry, what was the TED Talk that you mentioned?
The TED Talk is by a guy named Jonathan Haidt, and his last name is spelled H-A-I-D-T. And his book is called The Righteous Mind, and it's fantastic. Any other questions about resources, where, when, why, studies I referenced? By the way, if you do want a copy of this Google slide presentation, I'm happy to email it to you. Just leave me your email, and I'll do that. And I brought swag, but like I said, it's all gone, I think, except for one ProCon hat. If you do want swag, leave me your address, and I'll happy to mail you bags, bookmarks, hats, shirts, that sort of thing. Happy to do that. Otherwise, I have a happy Constitution Day. Thank you for sacrificing your Saturday, and thanks for your time.